Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Family Said Dan channel. Here's a headline from the Daily Huddle. Ripple CTO weighs in on upcoming ruling in SEC lawsuit, says XRP fits the definition of a commodity. And so I'll say this. I think, so they're talking about David Schwartz, of course, here. Ripple CTO, co-creator of the XRP ledger. I think David Schwartz makes a compelling case here. And I've, up to this point, been open to the idea of cryptocurrencies in general being classified as commodities. Some people don't think that makes sense. I'm not technically 100% sold either way. Some people say it's not a commodity. It's just a virtual currency. And XRP has clearly been deemed a virtual currency. The United States government has already deemed that. But something could be more than one thing, virtual currency and a commodity, perhaps. So I'm willing to be persuaded on this, but I'm going to share with you what David Schwartz had to say. He's clearly thought this through, and I do think he has a rather compelling case. But before going further, I do want to be clear, I do not have a legal or financial background of any kind. I am not offering legal or financial advice, and you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto-related topics, but just as a hobby and just for fun. All right, and so this stems from a conversation that I actually covered yesterday. And I'm not going to go through that whole thing again, but there was some, I think, thoughtful discourse between XRP community members on Twitter about the current state of what's going on in the SEC v. Ripple case. What is the status of XRP? So the only portion from that video that I'm going to repeat is the few of the tweets that are on your screen right now. And then the rest of it's all entirely new content. It branched out in an interesting way. And David Schwartz jumped in and chimed in. So I want to share with you what was stated here. So the portion that I covered yesterday, just to set the table, I've got to do it again for this video. It's what's on your screen right here. So Jay, a member of the XRP community, wrote, "Let's take Apple for the sake of your example. Before they went public and became established, if Apple created a capped amount of iPhones, 100 million, used the profits from the sales of those iPhones as revenue to build up Apple, and promised efforts to get it adopted and raise its value, while putting 50 million of those iPhones on the market to be traded on by investors, while Apple sell on the same market for its revenue, do you all honestly believe that would be okay? Or are you all going to continue to try to make excuses and comparisons due to your biases and create examples while leaving out certain aspects surrounding Ripple and XRP? Like I said, a settlement that allows Ripple to carry on with no changes opens up a new world of problems." Now, and I said yesterday, I actually think that's a reasonable critique. I don't feel the same as Jay, but it's not unreasonable what he's stating here. But it's also certainly true that as it pertains to specifics in the SEC v. Ripple case. I mean, Ripple didn't even create XRP, and even if you want to say, okay, but they're clearly behaving in a way that it's a loophole, create the thing and then start the company. Even if you want to make that argument, fine, that doesn't get you closer to satisfying the Howey test anyway. And when you're talking about XRP itself, it's not like there was an ICO. It's not like money was raised to further some sort of business effort. It's the case that XRP was already 100% fully functional anyway. It existed. It existed before Ripple the company existed. So there are some differences there, but the argument Jay's making, it's fine. It's not unreasonable. He's not like he's being trolly about it. Well, David Schwartz then jumped in, and this is where it gets really interesting. So check this out. David Schwartz said to Jay, "What problems do you foresee from a ruling that says that a sale of a commodity with no post-sale obligations of the seller to the buyer is not an investment contract?" And Jay responded and said, if the judge rules in a way that clearly articulates that Ripple sales are not security transactions, then it's fair game. But I don't see that coming from Gary. Also, I believe that with the type of ruling, she must fully break down how XRP constitutes a commodity. And David Schwartz responded with the following. And again, I think that this is a pretty compelling argument. He says, XRP is a raw good that trades in commerce, and one XRP is treated as equivalent to every other XRP. That's pretty much the definition of a commodity. No part of XRP's value comes from anyone else's legal obligations to XRP holders. Now, if you pause and think about that comment, even in a vacuum, right by itself, if you understand that and know that obviously that is true, because there's no separate, there's no sort of innate contract that just develops. If I send you XRP, there's no contract that develops with Ripple or me or anybody else. You'd have to write up an actual contract. So if you understand that, it just, if you think about the SEC v. Ripple case, you'll quickly understand just how absurd the SEC's arguments are. There are no post-sale obligations, period. And even the SEC had to cede that point, which is why they ceased to argue that Ripple itself is the common enterprise. They initially argued that, and then they backpedaled because they have a piss poor argument. And why do they have a piss poor argument? Because they don't even acknowledge what XRP actually is. And so I find the argument to be compelling that it's a commodity. And I'm willing to be persuaded. If somebody has a stronger argument than that, hey, I'm all ears. But I do find that pretty compelling. And at a minimum, certainly a virtual currency, because it's literally legally already been declared that by an agency within the federal government. That part's not in dispute. But anyway, Jay responded and said, I understand that you guys have no legal obligations to any of us, but XRP has never been officially deemed a commodity. I don't believe the courts are viewing them as commodities as of yet. So I assume when they see projects create something and sit on a ton of the supply while profiting from it and letting investors speculate on it, while the creating entity tries to gain adoption and raise the value for it, I don't see too many ways the judge can look on those scenarios. Yeah, well, and this is where I just respectfully disagree with Jay. He's entitled to his opinion. He's not saying anything wacky here, but I certainly disagree. There's a lot of ways, and I was talking about it in a video literally yesterday, and I covered Attorney Deaton's perspective on how Ripple could get an outright win and what that might look like, and the rationale for it. And so again, if you apply the Howey test here, I don't think that it makes any damn sense. So anyway, David Schwartz responded and said, the government describes tokens as commodities every time it's in their interest to do so. Here's one of many examples. And he shared a lawsuit, and this news broke a few weeks ago. This is one headline covering the story from December 28th, just a few weeks ago. Abraham Eisenberg charged with fraud, market manipulation. A.V. Eisenberg may have been too clever for his own good when he publicly revealed he was responsible for the Mango market's exploit in October. It turns out the FBI was listening. The Department of Justice has moved against another notorious crypto figure. Abraham Eisenberg was reportedly apprehended by law enforcement yesterday in Puerto Rico for his role in the Mango market's exploit that made him famous on crypto Twitter in October. The affidavit indicates that Eisenberg is facing one count of commodities fraud and one count of commodities manipulation. So, folks, what David Schwartz is pointing out here is that the government will argue whatever they need to, whatever's most beneficial to them in that moment. And so in going after this individual, rather than claiming securities fraud, they seem to think that it would be easier to get him on commodities fraud rather than arguing that so-and-so represented an investment contract, this or that. So, again, it's a perfectly fair, true point that David Schwartz is citing here, that the government will argue that a thing is a commodity if they want to, because reasons. It's the government. They do whatever they want. And then David says, just to be clear, I'm not claiming this means anything other than it's reasonable to describe tokens as commodities. One can sell a commodity with an investment contract, and that's an offering of a security. Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think, my personal opinion, not an attack, but I think Jay's missing the mark, because there are no post-sale obligations. So to me, I'm thinking about the judge analyzing this, I'm just like, how do you find that Ripple did anything wrong when the SEC isn't even talking about, they're not even complaining about specific transactions, just the entire ecosystem? I don't see how that makes any damn sense. But anyway, Jay responded and said, gotcha. This is in reference to Mango Market's trading platform. I want to be clear that I don't believe a digital asset by itself is a security. I don't believe crypto on trading platforms are securities. I'm only speaking on Ripple and its transactions. I hold XRP, by the way. But why I say Ripple is because the whole on-demand liquidity and the company's profits and sales are intertwined with the secondary market. Whether it affects us positively or negatively, it has an impact. Yeah, and so I'll note, Jay has said in previous threads that he does believe, and I may have highlighted it yesterday actually, but he does believe that Ripple's transactions do constitute an investment contract. I'm not so sold on the concept. If you look at the way that the SEC argued, again, if they're not even citing specific transactions, I don't see how you get to that conclusion anyway. Even if they'd otherwise be right, like maybe, I'll entertain the idea, like maybe the SEC could have gotten a victory on some previous sales, maybe. But they're not even arguing that. So how do they get a victory on anything? You see what I'm saying? And then David responded and said, I agree that there's a difference, but the legal issue is whether that difference forms an investment contract. Many of those other elements are present with things like diamonds and iPhones. But what I wonder is what issue you see with a ruling that says that for an offer to constitute an investment contract, there must be post-sale legal obligations to the buyer. And then he shared, in writing that, David Schwartz shared this tweet from Jay from earlier in the conversation where Jay said, or are you all going to continue to try and make excuses and comparisons due to your biases and create examples while leaving out certain aspects surrounding Ripple and XRP? Like I said, a settlement that allows Ripple to carry on with no changes opens up a new world of problems. And so David Schwartz here again is saying, what is the issue that you're seeing? Like what's the whole new world of problems? But then Jay responded and said, when you put it that way, there is no issue. And he shared one of his older tweets where he wrote, if the judge rules in a way that clearly articulates that Ripple sales are not security transactions, then it's fair game. But I don't see that coming from Gary. Also, I believe that with that type of ruling, she must fully break down how XRP constitutes a commodity. And then he shared another tweet from himself from earlier in the conversation. He said, also, what would then stop other companies from coming up with ways to profit on token sales when they have no intentions on really creating a use for that token? Use an entity to build it, gift the supply under a different entity, and profit on the back end. And David Schwartz responded and said, I agree that there are new risks to consumers created by digital currencies. I think the worst of them are addressed by existing laws, such as those prohibiting fraud. You can see lots of CFTC and Department of Justice actions that don't rely on securities law. Congress can also pass new laws. Yeah, exactly. So there's a path forward here. And it's a shame that in 2023 we're even having to have this conversation because the SEC has not provided sufficient regulatory clarity. They just want to regulate by enforcement. But this is going to be figured out. And it may just end up being the case that cryptocurrencies are just actually viewed in the future as commodities. I don't know for sure if that's going to happen. But I'll say this. I am convinced at this particular juncture in time that cryptocurrencies certainly much more resemble commodities than securities. To me, that's abundantly clear, very obvious. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the Moon family sedan.